And in fact, I'd say for anybody watching or listening to this is you should cultivate spaces in your life where you can just say the thing and it doesn't have to make sense. And so therefore I'm going to say the dumb thing. I'm going to say the wrong thing until I can figure out how to say the right thing. And I'm going to say it out loud. I can learn how to say it.
Welcome to People Watching, a podcast where we figure out what it looks like to become the role model we've always wanted by talking with real people who have found real role models in their own lives. I'm Megan Robinson. Every week, I sit down with a guest, and together we cut through all the noise and identify better sources of hope, creativity, and wisdom as we learn to make decisions about the kind of life we want to live. So join us. Let's do some people watching. My guest today is Garland Dunlap. I first met Garland about 13 years ago in my first semester at grad school. Garland is an educator, writer, and strategist. He works at the intersection of spirituality, education, and cultural imagination. He holds graduate degrees in theology and education and has spent most of his career in higher ed. He advises nonprofits and institutions on strategic clarity and mission alignment, where he focuses on spiritually grounded leadership. Garland has just finished his first book on reimagining education through a theological lens, and he's already at work on his next project on the aesthetics of learning. His work consistently explores how people make meaning across difference and how learning becomes a form of spiritual and creative practice. I was especially interested to talk with Garland about the intersection of creativity and education, because I think that all too often we think of education as a container for policy, rather than as a sandbox for growth. I loved hearing him share about how Afrofuturism can be a path for us to rehumanize those who have been pushed to the margins. And I also really appreciated Garland's insights about navigating the world through his neurodivergent lens of autism and ADHD. Garland lives with his wife and son in the Pacific Northwest, where he's recently taken up gardening as both a sustainability project and a spiritual practice. As with every conversation I have with Garland, I learned so much from him about what it looks like to create space for reflection, renewal, and deep listening, especially for those who don't feel like they fit the mold. You know, my kind of people. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. We're in the studio. Yay.
Wonderful. This is awesome.
I am so excited. I can't even tell you.
Oh, me too. This is going to be fun.
Awesome. Garland, welcome to People Watching, and thrilled to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. As we get started with our conversation, I always like to have my guest read with my guest the Touchstones. And these, I think, just help shape our conversation, our expectations for each other, and help our listeners know what to expect from us and how we'll move forward. Whatever we share is by invitation, not obligation. If either of us is not comfortable pursuing a topic, let's just say, I prefer not to share. Thank you.
Silence is also a partner in our conversation. Feel free to take a moment to reflect without immediately filling the space with words. Leave room for the inner teacher to whisper to.
Be present as fully as possible. This is a space to acknowledge our doubts, fears, and failings, as much as it is a space to share our joys, convictions, and successes.
Ask open, honest questions. If we're not sure what the other meant in the question or statement, ask. It gives us a chance to clarify or rephrase. Ask questions that we genuinely don't know the answer to. Surprise is a great catalyst of insight.
Hear, hear. Awesome. I also really want to ask you, and maybe we can continue talking, the thread of role models can go into Afrofuturism, because I don't know much about this. And this is something that you've mentioned as an interest of yours, as kind of offering tools for you? And how did you encounter Afrofuturism? What made it come alive for you? I'm just so curious about it.
Sure.
I think I know what it is, but tell me what it is.
So I'll start with illustration and then we'll talk definition. So
Perfect.
You're familiar with Black Panther, the movie?
Yes.
Okay. So Wakanda is a kingdom, a fictional kingdom in the middle of Africa. It is untouched by colonization. Yes. Untouched by colonization. And so they have this future technology. And if you look actually at even the structure of the buildings, like it's very, so not only is it futuristic, but like their society has a harmony. There's harmony with nature. So you'll see the buildings are built in there. So there's a lot of eco-friendliness, and the society structures seem to be working together. So ultimately, Afrofuturism, number one, comes out of the United States and started with the question of what might the Black experience, particularly the African American experience, look like if colonization, if slavery had never occurred. And so it takes that idea and then usually advances it into the future.
Okay.
So Wakanda is a textbook example and picture of what Afrofuturism is. In fact, I could talk all day about Marvel, but a lot of people, I remember one of my friends was like, Black Panther was not a good superhero movie. And I was like, yeah, that's because it's not a superhero movie. It's an Afrofuturist movie. And if you look at it from an Afrofuturist lens, it is a, like, theses should be written on how it exemplifies Afrofuturist ideas.
Sure. Okay.
Even the conflict between Killmonger, and actually you can contrast Killmonger's perspective, T'Challa's perspective, the Black Panther, and Nakia's perspective, his girlfriend, in terms of how they're dealing with the problem of colonialism. She is an interventionist, Killmonger is a fighter, and T'Challa initially is an isolationist. And so those are your three moves. So now it branches out. It's not just a literary or even a film. In fact, Black Panther is probably one of the first films. It's actually music. So there's a lot of music. Sun Ra, and Janelle Monáe. And my first encounter of it, and I didn't know what it was, but I was like, there is something here and I don't understand. It was actually Parliament Funkadelic. So if you look at their aesthetic, and if you look at all the things they're doing on stage, and I was like, there's something being communicated here, but I can't fit it is. Well, it's an Afrofuturist aesthetic. It's carrying that same idea of what could the Black experience look like untouched by colonialism and by now they're going in a particular different direction. And as with many art, it's not necessarily presenting itself as the definitive answer. So none of these artists are trying to say this is what it is. So they're saying this is what it could be.
Sure. I pretty much encountered the concept through science fiction.
Yes.
So,
that's your typical. That's your typical entry pathway.
Yeah.
But then you've got people like Octavia Butler, who famously wrote Parable of the Sower, ultimately a science fiction novel, but actually starts in 2025.
I just finished reading her Xenogenesis trilogy.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. And so, a little bit of history. So Afrofuturism starts in the United States. It expands into diaspora, so it hits into the Caribbean and the islands, and then crosses the pond and moves into the Pan-Africanism. Technically, Pan-Africanism is a different movement than Afrofuturism.
Okay.
And the distinction I would make is Afrofuturism really is coming out of American ideas, carries that. Whereas Pan-Africanism somewhat is independent, but is more dealing with continental African and then moving outward from there. So their questions are a little bit different because they're talking about what does it mean to unify the nations of Africa, and then what does that look like as it expands globally and even into the future. So similar trajectory, but different. Is what I would say. It's interesting because a lot of people are afraid of Afrofuturism. A, because I think they just don't know what it is. And B, I think it's the Afro that terrifies them. Because it does center Black American thought. Now, so here's the hard discussion part. I think that makes people nervous because their only concept of centering a particular cultural or ethnic identity is rooted in the concepts of supremacy. So
Um,
most people understand that if I say this ethnicity is good or this is centered, what that means is this ethnicity is superior to all other ethnicities. And usually that is tangled in, and therefore those need to be suppressed or destroyed.
hmm,
And Afrofuturism does not say that.
gotcha. Okay.
Afrofuturism just says, what does it look like from our perspective? Take this idea and encountering into the future.
So
So
it
it's,
sounds like it sounds like it could be a very collaborative perspective.
yes.
Hmm.
And then, so now I'll speak to some of the Christians in the room who are probably still nervous a little bit, but I would say, can you think of anywhere in the Bible where somebody envisions a kingdom that does not exist or does not yet exist, and yet insists that we move toward that kingdom and according to those principles? Welcome to Afrofuturism.
I love that. I love that.
And honestly, so in terms of a scholarly move, that's what so I have influence. I'm going to name names. Somebody we know in common, Shannon Rivenstein. So I appreciate her because we have had a lot of conversations about beauty and aesthetics and the role of creativity and culture making. And there's a lot of sharpening in those conversations that we participated in. And so it was those conversations that started me down the path of looking at aesthetics. Aesthetics as a philosophical category, but then
Sure.
aesthetics as an applied philosophical category
Hmm.
exists in other realms. And so that's what made me start to ask, oh, what is aesthetics of education? Philosophy is in everything, so therefore there's an aesthetic of something. So what is the aesthetic
Sure.
of education? What does that really mean?
Mm.
The questions need to ask. And so that also sent me down the Afrofuturist path because I'm like, okay, so this is an aesthetic movement. It's an art movement. We communicate it in this art movement. And so three themes that I have consistently found are redemption of the past, shalom in the present, and hope for the future.
Hmm.
Like, what would it look like? So remember, my special interest is learning and education. So I'm like, what would it look like if education had that aesthetic? Redemption,
Okay.
shalom, and hope baked into our system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how does that change we
Mm.
do in education, what education feels like, the outcomes? It's now the questions come.
Yeah. Afrofuturism sounds to me like a very specific expression or manifestation of standpoint theory.
Not a theory I'm familiar with. Unpack it for me.
It cracks me up because in my communication textbook, standpoint theory is literally you critique and you encounter from the point at which you stand.
Oh,
It
fair.
really is just that simple. It really is just that simple. I can only communicate with you from my perspective. Like our conversation is helping me encounter another perspective, and hopefully mine will be transformed. But at the end of the day, it's still only ever, we can only ever experience our own nervous system.
Right. And so therefore we're limited in some ways to the
Yeah.
perspective that we have. Yeah.
But it's Afrofuturism to me sounds like this extension of that idea of saying, how can we move, but also how can we move outside
Yes. So it
that?
is speculative is the word now.
Yeah.
I told you
Good
the
word.
good parts about Afrofuturism. So let me bring in, so I told you the rhythm, let's talk about the blues. So a lot of Afrofuturism also explores the pain of the African American experience.
Sure.
In the African American narrative, which is just present. So I'm not pushing an agenda. The reality of the African American experience is since we got on this continent, it has been rough. And there has been trauma is an overused word sometimes, but trauma is the only appropriate word to describe what
Mhm.
many African Americans have generationally experienced. And I'm not here to label fault or blame. And in fact, Afrofuturism does not either, and at least in none that I've read, has it said
Okay.
or blamed anyone. And in fact, I appreciate Octavia Butler because she describes these incredibly horrific things, and she's just talking about it as if it's almost like reading a scientific report.
Sure.
She's
Yeah.
just telling you what happened.
Mhm.
Now, how
Yeah.
you feel
Mhm.
about it is how you, and if you feel guilty, that's on you. But she what to feel about it and
Right.
what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you
Yeah.
feel awful about her, whatever. Like she's not, and the characters don't demand that you take a particular stance. The characters are just the move I'm making. But she's not making any demands on what you need to do. I think is intentional on her part
Yeah.
because I think
Yeah.
she's just telling you the facts. She's showing you where this character is going, and then she's letting you decide what you're going to do. And I think it's that speculative future that I very much appreciate about Afrofuturism, and that speculative move that I'm trying to learn and understand,
Sure. Yeah.
appreciate, and then fold into my writing, my thinking, and I'm trying to
Yeah.
learn
Yeah.
from these artists who are imagining a future that does not exist. And by the way, that seems to be very important to what we believe as Christians.
Yes. Yes. I lo- m- the little phrase that keeps coming up for me is imagining different futures. If you've read Alan Jacobs' Breaking Bread with the Dead, he talks about looking at the distant past. And what we were saying with reading biblical narrative as part of the narrative, like
Right.
reading these older texts as speaking to us across time. And I think he's drawing on someone else, but he says the future has nothing to teach us because we're the ones who have to imagine it.
Huh. It's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that from a Christian perspective, so I have four verses. Genesis 1, basically we're made in the image of God. God is a maker. That is like that push to be makers, that push to be creative. And then we have Psalm, I can't remember which. One thing I ask and I would seek to dwell in the temple, in the house of the Lord
Yes.
all the days of my life and meditate on his beauty. So
Mhm.
that is like this presentness. What do we do now? What does it
Mhm.
look like now? But then, and this is my absolute favorite verse in all of scripture, Revelation 21:5. And the one
Yes.
who is seated on the throne at the end cries out and he says, behold, I am making all things new.
Mhm.
And then he says, write these things down, for they're trustworthy and true. And so that's that kind of pull. That's that kind of envision it and talk about it. Talk about
Mhm.
this just like John did when he was writing all these things and you could not make sense of. And he wrote about
Mhm.
it in the language he had available to him. That's what we're doing. We do have a glimpse of a future. And so what does it look like to try to meditate on the beauty of that? What does it look like to dwell in that? What does it look like to delight yourself in that? And I think that's the hard task. And I think going to Romans, where he said, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed.
Yeah, by the renewing of your mind.
And Paul says, guess what? You know what? Be imitators of me. I'm
Which is
imitating
a
Christ.
pretty
You can't see
strong
Christ right now,
statement to
but you can
say.
see
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
You can see me. I'm writing all my shit down. It's me.
Yeah, I like that movement. I like where you're going with that. And I think, yes, like that's what I see Afrofuturism doing is it's speculative, it's imaginative, and to borrow from Disney, I think it inspires to me Imagineering. So it's
Yeah.
because I do think there's a sense of we should be working towards something that when I read, it stirs in me a desire to want to work towards something.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, if somebody wanted a foray into Afrofuturism, start with Octavia Butler.
Have you read the Broken Earth trilogy?
I have not yet. I have not. It's
Okay.
on my list.
Okay.
It's on my list. I've been in nonfiction for a while, so I'm just now getting back into fiction because I was doing the book.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I told a friend of mine, she was like asking for science fiction fantasy recommendations because she really wasn't familiar with a lot of it. I was like, oh, sinister
Buckle up.
math. Or I had recommended that to her.
Yeah.
And I said, I will be very curious what you think because the main character, female character, is a sympathetic character, but not a likable character at all.
Yeah.
And I love that. I
Yeah.
love that about it. Because it's like you want to find out why this person is the way they are. And then you should really look at the world, the system, the structures around it that have told her you can only be a certain way in the world. And you can only express who you are a certain way. And if we do not carefully corral and contain and structure this, you are dangerous.
And those are the kinds of themes that you'll see appear because, again, it's reflective of the Black American experience and comes and centers that thought. But yeah, you'll see characters that you're like, I don't like this character, though I do sympathize with this character.
Yes.
Or you'll see the good guys being very flawed or making decisions that you're like, I don't know if that's the decision that I would have made.
Sure.
One of the key things in the Parable of the Sower and then its sequel is the main character essentially walks away from her family to start a relationship. Her daughter struggles with that.
Sure. Yeah. And what do you do with that?
Right. And I don't think that Butler, who has passed away, I don't think that she's trying to tell you what to do. In fact, I think she would say, what do you think you should do about that? That's probably what she would say. Because I think which is again a thing that I appreciate because it's such a movement that you see actually in the Bible is there's so many times the biblical author, all these horrible things are happening. And I don't think the author's trying to tell you this is what should be or even is endorsing what's happening. I think the author's, hey, this happened. So what would you have done?
Sure.
Who are you in this story?
In the narrative. Stand here.
Yeah. Put yourself in the narrative. What's the choice you would have? Because are you Bathsheba? Are you David? Are you Uriah? Are you his Joel? His general? The general who ordered...
Oh, Joab.
Joab, thank you. I was like, I got the name wrong. Yeah, are you Joab? What you have done if you were Joab? Because Joab knew exactly what David was asking him to do. He knew exactly what was going on. What's the choice you would have made? And that's what the biblical authors, I think, are sometimes doing. I just wrote a piece about the Easter meditation reflection, and it was about the thief on the cross. And I think in part, I think the thief is not named because we are supposed to put ourselves in the thief next to Jesus on the cross. We also are supposed to put ourselves in the crowd, and we're supposed to be the other guy. But I think we should be asking ourselves, who are we and who do we want to?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's questions that we don't ask ourselves now. And I think that's why we're so unhappy that things like we don't have good role models. We don't have any role models because we're not asking, who do I want to be and why?
And I think GK, that's such an important question. Who do I want to be and why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. And I remember because for a while I was going to be a philosophy major and then I was a philosophy minor. And then I was like, hey, I think theology is doing the stuff I want to do.
Yeah, philosophy seems nice till you get into it. And then you're like, oh, no, I don't want to.
Yeah. I realized for me, philosophy argues in circles.
Yeah.
It's the method and theology was the journey. So that's how I interpreted it.
I'm with you there. And it's why I understand. I appreciate philosophy. I think it has a place. And I am not, some of the philosophy questions are just not questions I'm interested in.
Sure.
I am not interested in arguing the logical coherence of the Trinity. I've accepted it as true. And I'm not interested in proving whether it's true or not true.
Yeah. Faith reaches beyond understanding, but it doesn't ask us to replace understanding. It doesn't try to take the place of it.
Correct.
And I think that there is a point at which you just have to say, it's just too big for my brain, too mysterious, too wonderful, too infinite. And so I'm just going to have to understand what I can understand and be okay with the not understanding the rest, which is very hard.
It is. So another early thought I remember having was realizing that at some point you can keep asking questions and you work hard enough, you can get the answer. Like most of the time. there's some end point where you're going to hit a point where you say, I do not have the capability of answering that question. And then you're gonna have to make a decision. And so
Yeah.
what I realize is you don't always have to get to that end point before you make the decision to choose. You can
Yeah.
choose before
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. And I think that is something. So when I think about the idea of responsibility as a key thing to look for in a role model, it also encompasses that. What I think you're talking about is
Mm.
a humility, but also taking responsibility for the choices that you make and the effects that they have.
Yes.
And what you were describing is you can logic your way to the very end and find an answer and realize you're not going to come up with the ultimate answer or an answer that fully satisfies you. Or you can just travel along that path and go, you know what? I can see where this is going to go and I don't need to go there.
Yeah, I don't
And
need
that's
to.
responsibility.
Yeah, I don't need to walk to the end of the Grand Canyon to realize that it's deep.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
appreciate the view, but I don't
Yeah.
need to see it in order that it's
Mhm.
deep.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, what is it I want to say? We don't see that as often. One of my other guests, Ashley Hill, and we were talking about role models, and she said, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is just disappointment, which I totally get, totally
Mhm.
fair. That's the whole reason I embarked on this whole project in the first place. I remember there was a specific episode when I was working at the seminary, and not Dallas, and one of my coworkers came in and was like, so did you hear about essentially it was the latest pastors behaving badly story.
Right, which there was a trend on.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter who, because it doesn't. And I remember my reaction, and honestly, I'm more sad now about my reaction, but my reaction was like, of course, sure.
Yeah. I wish I was surprised. I'm not.
What else do you expect at this
Yeah.
point? And I'm more sad about that now. But I remember saying to my friend, I don't know if this is hubris or what. I'm tired of looking around and not seeing people that I want to admire. So I guess I'm just going to have to become the person I want to admire. And it's because so many people are not taking responsibility. We're always watching and we're always being watched. And I don't
Mhm.
mean this in this creepy spy way or whatever. It's just if you move through the world and you are encountered by another human being, you're being watched for how you're moving through the world.
Correct.
You are having an effect, whether you realize it or not. So what are you going to do about that? How are you going to manage your presence in the world? And that doesn't have to mean performing. That just means I am going to be intentional and thoughtful about who I am and who I bring to the table.
And what you said about conforming is so important. So jumping back, one of the things in realizing that I was neurodivergent and had autism, I realized how much I was performing. And to be fair, like the reason why masking occurs, so for those in your audience who don't know, masking is essentially putting on behaviors that are socially acceptable. And it's not deceptive, that's not the intent. It's more of, as an autistic person, you very quickly realize that you think and act differently. And then you also realize that it is not in your benefit to think and act differently because there are actual consequences, social, financial, political. And so then you learn to imitate the behaviors of others. But what happens over time is you lose the ability to be in touch with your natural self, and it causes harm over time and causes increased stress.
I'm just
So you
thinking
don't want to
about,
perform.
yes. Because so one of the reasons why I'm interested in this idea of performing or the performative is just the ubiquitousness of influencers. How social media has trained us to be a brand, we don't have a brand, we are a brand.
Correct.
Which means you're always performing the brand. And so in that sense, I think I'm calling that the performative to distinguish it from the fact that we do perform. As
Mhm.
you just described, you do perform. And when performing has benefits in that it helps you. There is a social good to similar behaviors.
Yeah,
But
there's a
there
reason
is
why
a
we all
point.
act the same.
Yeah. Sociocultural. This is, you do things a certain way in America that you don't do in the Netherlands
Right.
or you don't do in China. But what you were describing in masking isn't just performing, it's conforming. It is
Yes.
contorting, which is a very different performance.
Yes. And I think, well, and some of that performance, the not like if you're confluence of thoughts, sometimes the performance can move towards conformance if you're not careful. You wear
Sure.
the mask long enough, it starts to stick on your face. You're also right in that, and this is hard for people to understand when it comes to neurodivergence. And we were talking about this off camera, but neurodivergent brains really are structurally different. Like they wire different parts of the brain light up under different circumstances. And there's reasons for that. There are some technical reasons for that. But accepting that there are actual legitimate biological differences between neurodivergent brains and neurotypical brains, what that means is you're right. Like, I didn't realize that I was trying to fit myself into spaces that honestly were causing me stress because they were not designed to keep me comfortable.
You had mentioned, I read your newsletter about leaving your most recent role. Was it because of the neurodivergence or was that just a contributing factor? Whatever you want
No.
to talk about.
No, that was a combination of church politics and race.
Sure. Gotcha. Yep. As you do. As you do. Yeah.
So that I do want to honor, so I'm gonna just leave it there.
Yeah. 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 I think that was one of the things for me in my own context was just, you know what? You never there is keep trying to sit at the table and you just haven't pulled up you just haven't made room for a chair.
Yeah. And if there's a point at which you start to ask yourself, do I want to be at this table? Why do I want to be at this table?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
does this table cost?
Yeah.
What is the seat costing me? It's
Yeah.
not a runaway, but in some sense, there's also a sense of when somebody actually tells you, I never wanted you here in the first place, which is an exact phrase that I heard. It's, huh. Okay. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
I appreciate it. I'm okay. I've done my therapy. You go to, and this is a sad truth, and people don't like me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway because that's what I do. I've encountered racism in every church I've ever been in. I
Yeah.
wish that weren't the case, but it's true.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying everybody's racist. I'm not saying all the churches are racist. I'm saying I've encountered racism in every church I've been in.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate to say it, people are going to people and they just don't like different. That's
Yeah.
I do not want to minimize at all. I'm just also trying to go back to use the big word, theological anthropology, and quite frankly, we're really good at finding reasons to keep other different out.
We really are. And how many times does this get addressed in the Bible? In the book of Acts, in the book of Ephesians, in the book of Galatians, in the book of James. I think Peter, in one of his books, addresses it.
It goes back to, again, the systemic structures that reward. I've been doing a lot of reading on incentives, how systems build in incentives to get the results they want.
Yeah. So Michael Apple calls it the unwritten curriculum. Michael Apple, because so the context he's talking about is, if you think about it, like what we're actually teaching kids is how to obey authority, when to sit up, when to sit down, because all just about teaching kids certain behaviors. That's really what
Sure.
if you actually look at the kindergarten curriculum, they're teaching them some academic stuff, but really what they're teaching them is how to behave in schools. what the
Yeah.
point is.
Yeah. I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. I'd love to know if there's anything that resonated for you or maybe brought up questions. If you have feedback, a comment, or maybe you have a suggestion for someone you think I should talk to, I would love to know. I will leave a link in the description box below so you can just fill out that quick form, shoot me a message, and I promise I'll check it. So thanks so much for being here. And now let's get back to the conversation. And I think I was thinking about this not too long ago, and I was like, I did well in education because I learned how to perform, and I learned how to perform in a way that the teachers liked.
Yeah,
And I don't
education
think
is
that
a
was bad
game.
thing, because
Yeah.
I liked it. I was happy. I was able to learn in that, but it's just experience and transformations and thinking. Just I look back and I'm going, that's why I was able to succeed in a lot of what I was doing, because I knew how to perform what that person wanted.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that goes back to the story I told about the worksheets. Had I to perform, then I would have gotten better grades in high school.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I need to honor my teachers, because it's not that my teachers were bad. I think I had some great and really good teachers, actually.
Yeah.
But they were also just doing the thing that made sense to them in the context that we're doing.
And at the end of the day, they had to talk to their supervisors, and their supervisors had metrics they wanted them to meet. And yeah, it was just
They
this
have to put
endless
a grade in the grade book, and they need evidence for that grade. Well,
Yeah. I just remember being in Dr. Lanier Burns' class.
I already see where this is going. Because I know Dr.
And you
Burns.
get exams, and they were like the craziest exams, and you'd still get a fantastic grade, even though you got every question wrong. And I remember he told me, it's like, yeah, he doesn't want to give exams with the seminary.
It's God bless that man. And this is why I'm thinking about a lot about education, because we get it. It's these questions of, why are we giving the test in the first place? So what are we really trying to achieve here? And is the test the best way to go about achieving that goal? Because I think most of us would recognize it's actually not. That's why there's one professor, one of my theology professors, and I took most of my theology, because he didn't give tests. He had us write papers, which was actually helpful to me because it made me think through what I was thinking through.
Until you realized that all of those papers were not due until the end of the semester, and then you're sitting there with 25 pages you got to come up with.
It was like, oh, self-discipline. That's the other thing I needed to learn.
And you couldn't even start writing them until at least halfway through the semester.
Right, I mean, that's real. But that was so much more helpful to me, because sitting and memorizing a test in which I'm spitting back vocabulary, not helpful. I'm going to memorize that for long enough to forget it. But in terms of like, how is that going to help me minister to the anorexic girl who wants to commit suicide and needs me to talk her through a reason to live? Well, memorizing what the definition of kenosis is not helping me.
Yeah. I have an entire program developed for ministry. I have written out exactly what classes and how it would be and how it should be delivered. And how to help people get through some sort of preparation for ministry quickly so that they can go do it.
Yeah.
And right now, the working title is the Megan J. Robinson School of Theology, Theology and other stuff.
Nice. Nice. No, I love it. And you and I both, like, we can definitely, I love me some theology books. I appreciate the speculative aspects of understanding the nuances and things like that. So it's not like I'm bashing it. I'm not. And I think it equipped me to do some of the things I'm doing now.
Exactly.
And at the same time, I recognize its inefficiencies and where.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things for me is, as Christians, if we come out of a Christian tradition, and that tradition, at least that tradition claims there's a better way to live, then that better way needs to inform, like you need to be in conversation with what that better way looks like in this time and place. And that needs to inform. And that means questions are a good thing, not a scary thing.
And so for people like me and for neurodivergent people who live with questions, it is amazing how many people who I've encountered who are no longer in the faith who are like, yeah, I asked questions and people got mad at me, so I stopped asking questions. And I'm like, ask whatever you want. Now, my rule is always, I'm I may tell you I don't know. And I may tell you I'm not answering that question. I reserve the right for both of those. Ask me whatever you want. Like, for real, you can ask me whatever you want. I'm not going to you're not going to ask me what you want.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a friend of mine. She texted me a while ago. And she said, so I just met Jesus. I was like,
Tell me more.
yeah, okay. She said, I really want to talk to you about it. I was like, okay. So
it's a perspective.
Yeah. And so we were talking about it, and my friend grew up in Episcopal church, and I said, do you remember your creeds? Like, the conversation doesn't need to get bogged down in scripture, but do you remember the creeds?
Right. Let's just talk about those.
Yeah. Because I was like, those would probably be familiar to you. And she's like, yeah. I said, all of the good creeds, all the major ones, they specifically reference Jesus' divinity and his humanity. So he already embodied himself. I guess the question is, I'm just not sure where he need to do it again. Plus, he ascended, his physical body ascended. And before he ascended, he said, I'm going to send you a helper. I'm going to give you a helper. That's the Holy Spirit. So we have the piece that we need to do.
And by the way, the helper
do.
is better for you.
My friend, because she was at a winery. Like, this person just started talking to her. So my friend was like, I just wanted to slide over and be like, could I have a glass of water instead? And she went,
that's hilarious. And I appreciate the thought, and I appreciate the question. I really do appreciate the question because it's a good question.
Yeah, I love those questions, and I'm just like, sometimes people.
And I just had a text conversation because somebody was asking me about tithing, and so I was like, and I'm definitely of the orientation and of the my practice is I'm going to give you a response that is based on what I understand of the Bible and is faithful to understanding as possible. I might give you my opinion, but I'm more gonna lean toward this is what it says and here's how I understand it. And here's also where there's room to understand it differently. That's usually how I'm gonna approach any theological answer. Again, every now and then I'll actually give my opinion, but I'm like, I like my opinion, but I don't know if that's what you need right now. That's you and God need to have a conversation. Here's what God has said about it, and I'll go to God about it.
Yeah. I feel like most of the time when people ask for your opinion, or they ask where you come down on an issue or whatever, I'm always like, see, here's the problem. In order for me to answer that, I actually need to answer about 10 questions before to get to the answer so that you understand why I'm answering that and why it's not so simple as I think this or that.
Or
and nobody wants to hear those
I learned this from one of our favorite professors. It's actually a bad question, and let me explain to you why.
I remember I loved sitting in his theology classes. Just like philosophy classes, seminary tends to call a particular kind of young male jackass.
Yes, it does.
And there were a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they would always ask this question where you could tell they just really felt, they had gotten the question that was going to trip him up. He hadn't heard this form of question before. And I just always loved watching our professor. So he would just sit in there, let the person ask, had hands in his pockets, just listening. But he always had this little grin on his face. And I just always felt, and he was very nice, always responded.
I saw him being genuine.
It was also, the little grin was this, I am just sharpening my knives.
And I could always tell when he was holding back. There were definitely times where I was just like, oh, you really let him off the hook there. That was nice of you. And I appreciated that he was also, because sometimes people are just like, okay, I'm wrestling with this. And I've seen him be very pastoral and be like, okay, so here's a technical, let me walk you through where you get to. Because again, oftentimes you're walking into I came in as a young seminarian and I was going to figure out the whole divine sovereignty, man responsibility question. I knew that I was going to get the answer to that question once I walked out. And in about 5 minutes in the seminary, I was like, not only is that a bad question, but there are like 8 other questions that I need to resolve before I even can begin to approach that question.
Sure. Yeah. I remember Theology 1, Intro to Theology. I wish they had kept it as prolegomena in bibliology because it's just
Yeah.
fun to say that word,
Yeah, it's a
prolegomena.
great word.
Man.
The prologue.
And I remember sitting there for the first third of the semester, just being so thoroughly annoyed at belaboring revelation, divine
Mhm.
revelation. And I remember going to talk to him, and then finally, I remember saying to him, "Oh, you can't do theology until you understand how you get the content."
Right.
And he goes, "And that's why I teach it the way I do."
Yeah. And it's and I
Which
it is funny
which is
because
why I wanna do, like, a theology of human communication, because we have a theology of communication, we just call it revelation.
theology of divine communication effect, yeah. And so that theology, I do think we have not. I think there's room to understand the theology of human communication. Yes, I
Mhm.
believe that there is for that to be articulated.
Yeah,
Several things that haven't been articulated.
yeah,
That's the
yeah,
one.
yeah. But I wanted to ask you, I knew we would stray far and wide, and
It's all
I'm
good.
thrilled about it. I wanted to ask you, have you read any of John Ruskin?
I have
British.
not. Yeah, I know who
Okay.
you're talking about. I have not. Do I need to put
Because
him higher on my list?
the reason I'm saying it, because Alan Jacobs,
Mhm.
again, he's been on his blog and on different outlets where he writes, he's written articles about John Ruskin.
Okay.
And Ruskin was very focused on aesthetics
Mhm.
and justice, social,
Ooh, yeah. You're talking about
like
language.
really thinking about craftsmanship, beauty, the effect of beauty on daily life, system. So we're reaching the limits of what I do know. I'm
Yeah.
intrigued to read Ruskin, but as you were talking, when you were talking about the aesthetics of learning, I was just like, I just wonder if Ruskin could be a good conversation partner for that because
I
he talks so much about the all encompassing, like, beauty is not an afterthought, beauty is not an add on, beauty is. And actually, I just listened to this interview with, It'll Come to Me at
I know I
Midnight.
hate it when those names just like tumble
No,
out and you're just like, ah.
I'll post the link in the
Mhm.
description box. I'll send it to you. But Martin Shaw, there we
Ah.
go.
Yep.
Mythology and storyteller, mythologist
Mhm.
and storyteller. And he was talking about trailing beauty, and he uses the image of when Arthur, Holy Grail, Knights of the Round Table, when Arthur and his knights were not out like on war, making war or whatever, when they were at home, there was always like one particular animal, mythical animal they were constantly seeking. They never found them. But that wasn't the point. The point was the seeking. The point was following the trail of this animal. And so
Mhm.
Martin Shaw makes the point like, we're trailing beauty. Beauty is not a quality, beauty is an effect. Beauty is how it makes you feel. And
Yes.
so what are we doing seeking? That's inherent. That's then an inherency in everything.
This is something that I learned in conversations is that so beauty is a phenomenon, but beauty is a transcendental. So it's
Yes.
she's a sister and she has 2 other sisters, and that is goodness and
Yes.
truth. And
Yes.
beauty does not exist without goodness and truth. And if one leaves, the other 2 go. And
Mm.
which is such a key concept for me. And it actually solidified some things for me, which is also what got me on the aesthetic path. Because aesthetic beauty being the phenomenon and aesthetic being the category. But this is gonna be a weird segue, but I was like, okay, so what's the problem with pornography? Pornography
Mm.
is an attempt to have beauty with truth and goodness. And since
Mm.
goodness are removed, beauty leaves as well. And
Yeah.
that's why sometimes, like, you can look at something and say, okay, there's something wrong with that, but I can't figure out what it is. That's the same with
Mhm.
like propaganda.
Sure.
Propaganda is an attempt to have truth without goodness and the
Yeah.
beauty. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
it leaves. And when you're looking at propaganda, but it's hard for you to say why it's propaganda. It's because
Sure. Yeah.
truth, beauty, and goodness are no longer present.
Yeah. And that's why you always, there's the inherent tendency to see beautiful people as good.
Because we assume that if one of them is present, the other two are as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So beautiful
But I
people
think
have
it's
a
so interesting.
credibility.
Yeah. What's the beauty privilege or whatever that they call it?
Yeah. Pretty
No.
privilege or pretty people
That's
privilege.
it. Yeah. I knew it was more alliterative than that. But yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So anyway, that's why, like, when I was reading, you mentioned the aesthetics of learning, and then I was reading an article where Jacobs was talking about Ruskin. If I can find it, I'll send it just so
I
you can
appreciate
make
that.
like an intro.
Yeah, but I'll
Kind
definitely
of.
have to dig into him because I
Yeah.
think, and it's sad that like you have to like if you mention the word justice in these days, you have to put all these qualifiers on it because people assume that
Yeah.
they know what you're talking about when you say it.
Sure.
Which I would think that if we're talking the Bible, justice should not be like that's not a controversial idea.
You would think.
You would think, and yet for some reason in this environment, it is. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, justice is inherently wrapped up into a lot of these concepts of beauty and in a way that I can't fully articulate and don't fully understand, which is why I keep chasing it. Which I think that's part of I know a lot of what you're thinking about in this season is creativity. And so when it comes to my creative process, it's really about chasing ideas. And that, so when you read Pilates, this will make more sense. But I think there's an inherent, for me, the process of knowing and learning, there's an inherent faithfulness and belief comes with attending to that process. There's an understanding that when I'm digging at the end of that rainbow, that there truly is a pot of gold there, even if I
Mm.
don't know that I've never seen it. But I see
Yeah.
the rainbow, and so therefore that's enough for me to go chasing after it.
Yeah. I love
And
that.
yeah, and in that process of discovery, it leads me to another rainbow and another rainbow. And so what ends up happening for me, my people have asked me several times, like, how'd you write the book? And it was just an idea that wouldn't let go of me. And so I kept chasing the thought until I got to the end of the thought. And then it
Yeah.
led me to another thought.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think what creativity is. For a while, anyone who knows me knows I love makeup. It's a hobby. For a while, I worked as a makeup artist. And then, I developed some little courses to help people with shopping and all that stuff. And everyone's like, oh, you should keep doing this. You should, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, look, I have a lot of knowledge about this. I love it. I am more than happy to share what I know with people. If it helps them, great. But I've reached the horizon of that.
Yeah. Like you hit where you want to go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now
Like
it's
I've
taking you
spent
in a
all I
different
can
direction.
think of on that. I just don't have that level of passion for it to keep going. But all this stuff like personal formation and role models and thinking systemically, I'm like, that horizon is always receding. I will never reach the end of this in my lifetime. And that's what's interesting. And I think that's what creative perspective, creative practice, I think that's what that does. It says, I love what you said. It won't let go of me.
I tried to, I'm real talk. This book has been in the making literally for decades. And I tried to not write it at some point, and I couldn't not write it.
Penultimate question. What about this conversation has been most helpful for you?
Ooh, that's a deep thought. I think just the interaction. I appreciate your thoughts, and I appreciate the freedom just to express without having to say it in a particular way or say it just to explore and not have to have an answer. So I appreciate the freedom and the space that you've provided and are creating. I think it's necessary. And in fact, I'd say for anybody watching or listening to this is you should cultivate spaces in your life where you can just say the thing and it doesn't have to make sense. Say the thing.
Yeah.
This got me in trouble in seminary, but one of my objectives in seminary is I was like, I am here to learn. And so therefore I'm going to say the dumb thing. I'm going to say the wrong thing until I can figure out how to say the right thing. And I'm going to say it out loud. I can learn how to say it.
Yeah. I
So
love
you
that.
need spaces to be able to say the thing.
Yes. I love that. It's a good challenge. Last question. This is the toughest question of them all.
Oh.
What's the story of the best or the worst taco you have ever had?
Ooh.
And bear in
So
mind, y'all, we lived in Texas.
I know. So I will tell you, this is going to shock you, but the best taco I had, and I wouldn't say it's like the best taco ever, but I think it was just the surprise of what it was, is it was like a chicken tiki masala taco or something like that. So there was like rice and the Indian garam masala. I might be pronouncing it. It was a little bit spicy. So it wasn't a traditional, like what you
Yeah.
think Texas
Yeah.
taco. It was definitely flavor. But I think it was the combination of it that was something I had never had before. That was like,
Yeah.
that was awesome.
Yeah. I've had something similar. So during the pandemic, our neighborhood started scheduling food trucks and to come
Nice.
into the neighborhood. And it was so popular. They just keep doing it. So every week we have different food trucks. And there was a food truck that came in and they did a chicken tikka masala taco.
And it was just, yeah, it's hard to explain why it was so good because I've had the dish before. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But I'm like, oh, why I enjoyed it in that particular moment. In that moment. It
Yeah.
was just
The
delightful.
one that I had, they have this creamy slaw on it.
Oh, nice. Yes. So you got like the crunchy cool and the spicy
Yeah.
hot and oof.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was really good. Yeah. I know when I had Dr. Glunt, Prof. Glunt, I told her, I said, look, I know you have your doctorate now, but you're Prof. Glunt. I'm sorry.
But you are.
Yeah. But she said she had really good tacos in like somewhere in Rockwell. She couldn't figure out what.
And then people don't realize that about Texas. Like the best tacos are not the places like I'm like, it like had this pink sign and it was like in this corner. And honestly, it was a little bit sketchy.
Yeah. Okay,
The best taco ever.
wait, did you ever eat at Taco Zimas?
Oh, right down the street from the 70. Oh my goodness, that
Yeah.
place was amazing.
Damn it.
Yeah.
I never went because I was like, this will either be the best decision of my life or the worst decision and I will regret it. And
No,
so I never stopped.
No, when I walked in and I saw a bunch of construction workers, I was like, oh, give me 3 of everything. Like that, you have told me everything I need to know about this.
Yes. Oh, next time I go to Dallas, I'll have to just swing into
Definitely
Taco
stop by.
Zimas.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I drove by it all the time. And I was like,
It looks shady and you're like, this seems questionable. But it was definitely worth it.
Am I too white for this place?
I have concerns. So no, totally. Like, it was absolutely worth it. It was absolutely worth it.
Okay. So next time I go to Dallas, whenever that is, awesome. Garland, when does your book Just Desserts come out?
Good question. Short answer, I don't know. Longer answer, it's just recently gone to the publisher, so I need to get a schedule in terms of the time frame. I would expect probably end of the year, beginning of January. I will definitely keep you informed when you know there's like the
Which
official
publisher are you working with?
Whip and Stock.
Okay.
Yeah. So Whip and Stock. It's an obscure topic, but it's I think an important topic. And I think when I've talked to people about it and the people I've shown, they're like, yeah, this is an important topic.
Yeah. I love Whip and Stock because they will publish so many weird titles.
Yeah.
There is a title, they have a title, I forget the author, but it's basically like Carl Bart and the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Which is, yay. I think it's worth talking about that.
Yeah. So where can people connect with you or find you if they'd like to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so I would say subscribe to my Substack, and that is faithandmuses.substack.com. There is a free version if you want to support the work. You can upgrade to the paid version. It's $5 a month. So I would greatly appreciate either one. And then I think I also am doing some work with my wife. So she started a nonprofit consulting, and it's called Not Just Fundraising. So it's notjustfundraising.com. She handles a lot of like the fundraising side and operations support. And then I do some strategic planning and leadership development. So
Great.
if you listen to me and you thought, I'd love to be talking about leadership and leadership development and somebody who can listen and help me put ideas together, check the website, notjustfundraising.com, and schedule an appointment and we can work with one another.
Awesome. I can testify to Garland helping me be the person and leader that I am or want to be. So definitely take it from me, contact him. Lanita is awesome as well.
She is awesome. Yes.
Yeah. And I'll
Yeah,
make sure
and
to
Lindy and I are very different people in all of the best ways. The things I do poorly, she does well. And then she does everything well. So I don't know that there's anything she does poorly.
I will make sure to put the links in the description and we'll do that.
Truly.
Oh, it's been a delight. It's been a delight.
Yay.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found something that resonated with you and that encourages you to become more hopeful, creative, and wise in your own life. Make sure to check out the links in the description below and like and subscribe if you enjoy this episode. Shalom.